Anita Sarkeesian's Tropes vs. Women in Video Games project appears to be done. She moved on to other things and announced that she's going to retire it this year. So we're probably going to get just 1 or 2 more videos in this series before she puts a lid on it, and that means we can already start to judge the project as a whole. To be honest, I never paid much attention to Anita, other than observing that she's arguably the biggest PR disaster to ever happen to feminism, and the reason for that is that I am not a gamer. I have other areas of interest, which unfortunately leave me no time to play video games. I knew that gamers were attacking her for misrepresenting their world, but I had no means to judge how true that was. But then, a few weeks ago, I made a light-hearted video titled Anita Sarkeesian vs. Boxy, and in the process I watched the entire Tropes vs. Women series and found it absolutely revolting. I had no way of telling whether Anita was being unfair to the gaming world, but it didn't matter. What she was saying was highly offensive to me as a lover of art, and as a human being in general, and then I decided I had to say something about it. Anita announced a Tropes vs. Women in Video Games project in June 2012 and specified that she was going to focus on 12 tropes which are prevalent in video games and manifest a sexist mindset towards women. 4 years later, she has completed only 5 of the intended 12, plus 2 other short videos that dealt with other issues. That in itself is okay. When you start out on a project like this, you sometimes find that you have to change some of your initial assumptions on the way, and that it is taking longer than expected. However, the end product does not justify this tardiness. We did not get a thesis here. What we got can best be described as a seminar work handed in by a first-degree student. Here's what I mean. When you set out to write a thesis, you first need an initial theory, through which you approach the material you're researching. This theory is usually culled from previous researches done on similar subjects. It is expected that as you delve into the material, your working theory will evolve and change, as you refine it to fit with the specifics of the subject you are exploring. But none of this is present in Anita's project. For all intents and purposes, it looks like what you do as a first-degree student writing your first seminar paper, in which what you are expected to do is take some pre-existing theory and just show how your subject manifests that theory. Anita makes no effort to develop any kind of understanding of the uniqueness of video games as an artistic medium, and how this uniqueness should lead us to understand the gender dynamics within them. She just comes armed with a set of tropes which feminist writers have defined in other mediums, and cherry-picks the places in which these tropes are displayed in video games. If that was the intent, then there's really no excuse for all the time it took. There was no reason for her to explore the entire world of video games. She could just pick up a few popular games, show how the tropes are manifested in them, and be done with the whole thing in a couple of months. All of this I already knew from the first time I superficially glanced over Anita's videos 2 years ago. It was enough for me to decide that I don't want to waste any time on her, because I have better things to do than deal with freshman-level dissertations. But I didn't think that there was anything wrong with what she was doing. What she does is still academically valid. If you want to point out certain sexist tropes that are prevalent in video games, go ahead. But now that I've watched the series in its entirety, I realize that there was something a lot more sinister going on here. Since Sarkeesian doesn't bring into account the ways in which the tropes are placed within the context of the games she is reviewing, she is drawing some invalid and very demeaning conclusions about the people involved in video games. It is shameful and distressing that there are people out there who are actually taking her work seriously, and this calls for a critique of it. I know that there are literally thousands of YouTube videos out there already doing this, but I think that I have something to add, precisely because I am not a gamer. What I am is a culture critic, and I am going to attack her from that perspective. I'm going to assume that everything Anita tells me about video games is absolutely 100% accurate, and still show how what she does manifests a mentality that is harmful and offensive. Her work is degrading gamers, degrading women, degrading art, and degrading humanity, and we must point it out. Let me provide an example to explain what I mean by saying that Anita's analysis is invalidated because she doesn't consider the context of the things she's discussing. When I first saw the Matrix movie, I was deeply disturbed by it. It was an action movie that glorified terrorists, that glorified people who were murdering other people in cold blood without really caring about all the pain that they were causing. The justification for it was that they know the truth that the rest of humanity doesn't know, and they must do what they do in order to set the other people free. Well, this is pretty much what every terrorist in the world believes as well. Does that justify their actions? So I thought it was a good movie, but also the most immoral movie I ever saw. But then I saw the 2 sequels, and although they were inferior in the cinematic sense, they saved the entire story in the ethical sense. Because they essentially changed the genre, turned it from a sci-fi action movie into a sci-fi drama, and that gave the actions of the heroes an entirely different meaning. In an action movie, there is a clear distinction between the good guys and the bad guys, and the viewers are supposed to identify with the good guys who represent total good. In a drama, on the other hand, Every character is more complicated and has both good and bad, and the story conveys a struggle between different aspects of humanity. The viewers are not supposed to fully identify with the heroes of the drama, but to see the entire story as a reflection of the struggles in their own soul, and hopefully gain a better understanding of it. In the Matrix trilogy, it turns out in the end that what our heroes thought to be the truth was actually just another manipulation, and that they were pawns in a game played by two higher entities. So while the first Matrix movie on its own is an action film that makes us identify with terrorists, and might lead impressionable young people to believe that it is alright to go out and start killing people in order to liberate them, the Matrix trilogy might have the opposite effect. It might teach people to be more careful, to know that even if they believe they see things more clearly than others, that still doesn't mean that they know the truth, and it doesn't give them license to kill. The difference in the type of movie from action to drama changes the context, and thus changes the meaning of the hero's behavior and the effect it has on the viewers. None of these nuances are present in Anita Sarkeesian's analysis. Whenever a certain trope appears in a game, for her it always has the same effect on the gamer. And this is the thing that I found so revolting. It is often said that today's feminism is so regressive that it turned against the ideals of enlightenment, but Anita's regression goes back much further than that. She has turned against the very basis of our thought. She has turned against Socrates. The Greek philosopher Socrates never wrote any books, and never presented any philosophical system. What he is known for, however, is for the belief that all humans possess an ability to reason, and that therefore the way to educate them is not to indoctrinate them but rather to guide them towards achieving enlightenment by using their own faculties. In the dialogue Meno, Plato describes how Socrates calls over a young slave boy who never received any education, and guides him towards understanding a geometrical law. When you do that with ethics, people who learn in this way don't just follow the laws of morality because they are afraid of retribution, but because they understand their inner logic, and thus they can apply them better in every situation and become better people. Our Western culture is based on this notion, on treating humans as reasoning beings that can be led to understand the inner logic of the culture and why it is good. Art is one of the ways in which we can achieve this enlightenment. For example, what I described earlier about how watching the Matrix trilogy can make you understand why you should beware of radical movements. But that is not how Anita sees it. For her, the tropes will always have the same effect. When confronted with differences in genre, she brushes them aside as inconsequential.
Of course, if you look at any of these games in isolation, you'll be able to find incidental narrative circumstances that can be used to explain away the inclusion of violence against women as a plot device. But just because a particular event might make sense within the internal logic of a fictional narrative, that doesn't in and of itself justify its use.
So how does a trope work, in Anita's opinion? According to her, it always works in only one way. It reinforces a pattern of behavior in the gamer's mind.
Narratives that frame intimacy, love, or romance as something that blossoms from or hinges upon the disempowerment and victimization of women are extremely troubling because they tend to reinforce the widespread regressive notion that women in vulnerable, passive, or subordinate positions are somehow desirable because of their powerlessness. Damseled female characters tend to reinforce pre-existing regressive notions about women as a group. Because games are interactive systems, they can be programmed to reinforce male entitlement. The male gaze reinforces the notion that man looks and the woman is looked at. It reinforces.
This is the language of behavioral psychology, and this tells us exactly how Anita perceives gamers. She does not think of them in the way Socrates thought about human beings. She thinks of them in the way Pavlov thought about his dogs. If you're not familiar with Pavlov's famous experiment, basically it was a scientist who noticed that dogs begin to drool when food is served to them, and wondered if he can get them to drool even without the food. So whenever he served them food, he simultaneously rang a bell, and after a while, the mere ringing of the bell would get the dogs to drool, even without the food. The dogs have thus been made to behave in a way that was not determined by their natural instincts, but by outside conditioning. Behavioral psychologists carried on from there and showed that by using a system of punishments and rewards they can shape the behavior of animals and train them to do all sorts of tricks.
If it goes past one pigeon, the other pigeon can eat, and if it goes the other way, the other pigeon eats. So that there is it's a real game. The pigeon is reinforced for a cross-court shot if that is what gets the ball past his opponent.
Anita's rhetoric shows that she believes that this is how video games work on gamers.
Game systems are designed to provide feedback mechanisms that either punish or reward players for the ways they interact with virtual environments. Because video games are constructed around these formal input-output systems, they can be an especially powerful tool for reinforcing cognitive patterns by modeling and rewarding player behavior.
So Anita believes that gamers are like those ping-pong playing pigeons. They are being conditioned by the games they are playing to adopt sexist behaviors, and every time they are exposed to a sexist trope it reinforces their conditioning. The ways in which they might engage thoughtfully with these tropes is of no consequence to her. In short, she does not regard gamers as human beings. Defenders of Anita might say that she does concede at one point that it doesn't exactly work this way.
Likewise, engaging with these games is not going to magically transform players into raging sexists. We typically don't have a monkey-see, monkey-do direct cause-and-effect relationship with the media we consume. Cultural influence works in much more subtle and complicated ways.
But this is lip service, because then she goes on to say,
However, media narratives do have a powerful cultivation effect, helping to shape cultural attitudes and opinions. So when developers exploit sensationalized images of brutalized, mutilated, and victimized women over and over and over again, it tends to reinforce the dominant gender paradigm, which casts men as aggressive and commanding, and frames women as subordinate and dependent.
except that it's not the same thing over and over and over again. Even as a non-gamer who is not familiar with the game she reviews, I could see that the context was different in each of the cases of violence against women she describes. When you watch the entire series, it is quite obvious that Anita does believe that this is how it works, that gamers are being conditioned by the games they are playing into adopting sexist and violent attitudes towards women. In the process of trying to convince us that video games are bad, she reduces gamers to the level of unthinking animals. And when you dehumanize one group of people in such a way, you are effectively dehumanizing the entire human race. So I was offended not just for gamers, but also for myself as a human. Now if it was just Anita, I wouldn't mind. I just write her off as a despicable person and move on. But she did not come up with it. The dehumanizing perception of gamers that she pushes here is an established feminist trope, and feminists have been busy dehumanizing other groups as well. And this is just one of the harmful feminist tropes that are floating out there at the moment and have found their way into Anita's discourse. So Anita's videos might be worthless if you want to learn about the gaming world, but they are of much value if you want to learn about the current state of feminism. A project that analyzes Anita's work would hence be useful to highlight those harmful tropes and expose the threat that they pose to the future of art, to the future of Western society, and to the future of humanity. I am therefore embarking on this new series, in which I will point out the destructive feminist tropes that are present in Anita's Tropes vs. Women. I have identified several such tropes, and the way I see it now it will include 7 or 8 videos, including this one. Today we dealt with the dehumanizing effect that Anita's feminist rhetoric has on our discourse. Every video will be dedicated to discussing another trope. If you want to go along with me on this journey, I promise you that I will treat you as a thinking human being, not as an animal that needs to be trained. And yes, you will be able to discuss it in the comments below. Now, I will need funding for this project. Remember that it will require me to repeatedly watch Anita Sarkeesian's videos, and who knows what long-effect psychological damages may have on my psyche, and what treatments I will have to undergo to overcome it. I believe $500,000 should be enough to cover it. So I set up a Patreon where you can support me in this endeavor. If I get $500,000 within the next 30 days, I promise I will finish the project in less than 4 years. And if you end up not liking my videos, I will tell the UN that you are hurting my feelings online. So you better hit that like button.